Welcome, Vermonters, to our weekly discussion number 4. And the question that we proposed on Facebook was, what pantry, produce, and meat items on your shopping list do you see going up in price the most? Now, someone immediately commented, from the left, I guess, criticizing me and said, well, that's a loaded question. That's an obvious question. No, actually, as we'll discuss, it's a very legitimate question. And I do apologize for not getting this out sooner. We had a primary, and things have been a little crazy for everybody. But food inflation is a real issue, and the Democrats don't seem to want to talk about either food or inflation, and of course I do. And I'm not a hypocrite because I've been talking about it for years, for 20 years. And I am a big fan of the writer Wendell Berry and Joel Salatin, and actually can say I'm happy to know both of them. Wendell Berry wrote probably 30 or 40 years ago that if corporate America could design a system to deliver all food to us in a tube or a hose right from the factory to our navel, they would do it. And they've spent decades trying to figure out how to control our food supply for profits. And just like everything else, they want to dominate the market. And that's why I got into politics when they tried to stop me from selling on-farm slaughtered beef, because they didn't like us raising grass-fed beef and cutting into their profit share. Monsanto has boasted for decades about its desire to rid the country of farmers so they control everything. Food is big business. So when I look through these issues or these answers, what I'm also curious about is the disparity in food increases. This will impact people. Seafood has become very expensive, though I don't see any comments about this. But I see some people saying all things, which they are. With broad-based inflation, we will see inflation of all input costs, and therefore pretty much all foods. Many people mention eggs. Eggs have gone up a lot. I think there have been some problems with hatcheries and chickens and some disease that have made that worse. But recently it was reported that hamburger was up 35% as of 4th of July. When we're told that underlying inflation is at 9.1%, but hamburgers at 35%, then we see that there's a disparity there between the broad-based inflation and the food inflation. Gas is up 100% over 2 years, it seems, or whatever that's been. So somewhere the numbers may be fudged with about how they measure inflation. So when we talk to each other and we look at our grocery carts, that's how we can see what the real numbers are. And if we want to predict the future as far as trying to invest in those things that are going to go up the most, I could say almonds will probably go up given the drought. They're very water dependent. But almost all foods are going to go up even more this winter and next year, because as farmers know, fertilizers, all major fertilizers, have roughly tripled in the last 1 to 2 years. Some urea mixes have tripled in 1 year. And I talked to the farmers, and they've put them out on their fields, and now we have a drought, and yields are actually down. Some farmers chose not to put out fertilizers. That also reduces yields. Crystal Corvo notes here that her husband has raised our hay prices, which I know we will give back when we food shop. Well, that's true, but that's actually assuming, Crystal, that you and your husband make the same net income on your hay. When, depending on what kind you make, plastic wrap is up. I can't believe what sisal twine costs. Many of these products are unavailable. Diesel fuel is up. Fertilizers are up. Nobody wants to work. Equipment costs are up. Many farmers I talk to right now are not even putting up hay because the yields are so low. This is a crisis for Vermont farmers. It's being repeated around the world. And whether you blame drought on one thing or another doesn't matter. The consequence is going to be skyrocketing food inflation. Lenny Covey has a comment. I want to meet you sometime, Mr. Covey. Jonathan Lynch says, eggs, grits, and collards is about all we eat now. I can't remember what bacon tastes like. Oh, how I miss bacon. Well, we have local bacon in Mackenzie's of Vermont. We have some other products that are grown here in Vermont, and suddenly it's going to be more profitable for local people to produce food and also more affordable for us to buy them. As some people have pointed out here, they buy from CSAs. Cheryl Anderson talks about that. She also points out that flank steak used to be the cheap meat. Not her term, but she saw it the other day at $10.99 a pound. It is horrifying what's happening to food prices while heating oil and the cost of commuting has gone up. Many Vermonters commute 45 minutes or an hour each way. Their cars aren't always brand new and electric. In fact, for lower income Vermonters is pretty much assured that they won't be. Then there's medication. Health insurance is about to go up 15%. So when we're back to food and we see people on fixed incomes getting their food from Family Dollar, which we saw years ago, and their incomes are not going to keep pace with inflation, then we have to see that there is a growing food crisis. Now, I ran for governor with a farming manifesto with a 14-page outline of how it is that we take Wendell Berry's teachings and Joel Salatin's and Wes Jackson and many others and start implementing them to make it more profitable and affordable for people to farm in Vermont. The number one reason that people can't farm here, and we're not talking necessarily about dairy, we're talking about any form of farming, is that that real estate taxes and land prices are so high that it is not profitable. It cannot be profitable. And so what I have proposed is to offset that by, as Europe does and others, by allowing people to have a property tax and an income or an income tax credit who grow food. And if they did that, we would induce more people to come here rather than give them 10 grand to move. I mean, how is that an economic stimulus? A food stimulus, an agricultural stimulus, especially for those who remember the Great Depression, would help more people get on the ground and start growing food. It would bring down prices. These foods could be supplied more widely to our schools and to our prisons and to our military or our wherever we can have a public source of food. We shouldn't be buying food from far away that actually makes children obese, probably infertile. Studies are showing sperm counts are dropping. The only real food you can trust, the only true food you can truly trust is local food, and you know the person who grows it. And we grow lamb, we grow beef. We're aware of all of these input costs, and it's amazing to me how many people live in Vermont and are completely oblivious or maybe have blinders on in cognitive dissonance of what's going to happen this winter. And aside from the grain reserves and grain growing in Ukraine and how that's going to lead perhaps to a huge migration across Europe, where do Vermonters on low incomes anticipate getting their food? So this discussion is actually just the beginning of a broader one. And many people here say everything. Everything has gone up. Baked beans are gone up. Spam has gone up. Inflation affects everything, but as is also pointed out here, people's incomes have not gone up. Their commuting costs have gone up. Their taxes have gone up. Vermont increased its budget, along with Mark McDonald, who voted in favor of that, by 5%. Our median incomes did not go up that much. The salaries, though, of most state workers went up more than the median income of most Vermonters. It's time for us to really look at the top-heavy bureaucratic problems we have in our state and how it is making it impossible for people to live here who've spent their whole lives here and don't live here to get rich. And now they have to sacrifice the quality and amount and types of food they eat simply to pay the tax burden, their health insurance premiums, which have gone up tremendously in part because of One Care Vermont, which is another boondoggle program that gets people, bureaucrats, to make money at the expense of others and is not increasing patient care. So thank you for listening as we continue to try to discuss for people on the ground what's really happening in Vermont. Becca Ballant, Dave Zuckerman, well, they're going to help make economic equality in an economy that's declining. They're going to help gay rights and trans rights and these other things, but they're not talking about food or food inflation. Is that deliberate? Or are they just completely out of touch? Or are they going to own up to what they have done to the pensions that are now about $10 billion on the red? How are we going to pay that while feeding people? We're going to talk about universal meals for Vermont children. Well, that's highly inequitable, aside from being maybe a lot of it unhealthy food. How is that fair to people who make food to send their kids to school with healthy food? They have to pay for that too through their taxes. How is that fair for people that are millionaires and have a $6 million house and giggle that they get free food at school? Boy, Vermont's a great place. It's not equitable. It's not fair. It's not healthy for children. Oh, and universal daycare, same thing. Why don't we pay fathers and mothers to stay home and take care of their own kids if you're going to do that? Because the unintended consequence of these grandiose utopian plans is to prejudice those people who do. It's time to turn this stuff around. It's regressive, meaning it puts the burden on the poorest of Vermonters. This is what I want to run for This is what I want to talk about on the campaign trail, and it's what I want to talk about as your senator, whether you live in my county or not. There's a voice that needs to be heard at this table because the farmers have not been heard, and the fiscal conservatives have not been heard because they're not at the table. So what we have is this echo chamber of people passing extraordinarily ill-foresighted laws. These are totally horrible programs that are being passed. And our groceries are going to go up higher if we don't get involved and try to support our farmers and bring down costs for Vermonters so that they can afford them. I thank you, as always, for listening. And I ask you to stay in touch and get in touch with one another and start believing that we can make the change. This is our state. Agriculture is our history and our culture. If we can't grow food here, imagine in other parts of the country. Local food is now the future. The more fertilizer and fossil fuels go up, the more the pressures that destroyed Vermont dairy and other farms are going to reverse. It is actually an income opportunity. And Monsanto and Bill Gates and the others know it, and that's why you have to be a hedge fund to afford a farm in Vermont now. If you pay $1 million for a 20-acre farm, you're never going to be able to make any food on that. That's a gentrified farm. That's an Obama, Martha's Vineyard farm. Who is going to grow the food? We need young people to farm. Please have a look at my farming manifesto that's on my website. This is 2 years ago. Many of us have foreseen these problems, and we're telling you now, farmers are telling you now, it's going to get worse, because if hay is more expensive, then the meat that's grown from the hay is more expensive. And if fuels are more expensive out west, then grain's going to be more expensive in the confinement facilities, and it's going to cost more to truck it and ship it, transport it here. Everything's going to keep going up. Local is better, and Vermonters used to be self-reliant and not dependent on most of their food from imports. We can reverse that quickly. We have the land, we have the people. We just need to get the bureaucracy out of the way. Thank you again for listening.